Greetings, YouTube. Someone posted a comment to my main channel comment section the other day and asked if I was into comic books. Now, I was at one time a big comic reader. I started when I was a kid. I'd get them from my parents, my grandparents. The standards, mostly Marvels when I was a kid. Lots of Spider-Man. He was a very popular comic book when I was a kid. And as I got older, I would buy my own, and I was still interested in them, but the only place I could access them when I was pretty much from a middle school kid up through high school was a local five and dimes type diner. Just, it wasn't all that big. They had a very small comic section, and that's the only place I could buy comics. They didn't really have anywhere else in the city that had access to them. But shortly after I graduated high school, a comic book store opened in my city, and it was called the Comic Book Store. I know, not particularly interesting. And in fact, I walked past it. I saw no ads. I just walked past it one day, and the doors were open, and there was a sign outside saying that it would be opening in like 2 or 3 days. But the door was open, and there was people in there, so I walked in and said hello. And that's when I met the owner. His name was John, and one of his employees, I think it was Dave, and we started conversing, and I actually bought a comic book or a couple of comic books from him at that moment. So I was actually a customer of the store before it opened, and I remained a customer of that store for a very long time. John and I came to know each other fairly well. We still know each other. We just don't see each other any longer. And I bought a lot of comics between ages probably 18 and 30. I mean, there was a time when I would be dumping anywhere between $25 and $75 a week at the comic book store, both on comic books, and eventually he branched out into role-playing games, and I had access to all kinds of role-playing games, and that's where my real collection bug started for role-playing games, because now I had someplace I could buy them, which was excellent. There was a couple of sources in the city, but they weren't the variety wasn't as large as what John carried at his store. And I read comic books for a really long time. And by the time I really got out of comic books, I had 17 long boxes of comics. It was approximately 4,000 titles, I think, total. And I eventually decided I don't want to be in comics anymore. I don't want these comic books here. They're just cluttering up my apartment. I don't need them. I wasn't reading them. So I decided that I would go through my comic book collection, and my goal was to keep one long box. And I got one of the really high quality ones that had the drawers to pull out, so it actually doesn't even hold as many comics as a standard long box does. And I wanted to record the comics I owned. I wanted a memory of those comic books. So I set up a camera on a tripod and a music stand, and I had it all set up, and I put a comic book on the music stand, and I took a picture of it. I put another comic book on the stand, and I took another picture of it. And I did this for all 4,000 titles by box. So the files for this are like box 1, box 2, and then they weren't organized. My organizational skills, as you can see from the collection behind me, are next to 0. So I spent 3 or 4 days of vacation once in my office right here, listening to podcasts and taking pictures, a lot of pictures. So now I have a complete record of everything I ever read as comics now. And interestingly, while I'm going through this, I discovered that I had a fairly even Marvel DC split, maybe even favoring DC slightly. But there were comics in there, I'm like, I had no memory of ever buying or reading. I had a huge amount of Hulk and Green Lantern, and I have no idea why I did this. I'm just like, I have no memory of ever reading these things. I had quite a few independents, a lot of independents. I would say that half or more of my collection was independent comics, because I was buying big when the independent movement hit America, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles original work and everything that kind of grew out of that, small press, black and whites. Then I was really into a lot of different strange things at the time. And there were some adult comics, which I kept all of the adult comics because I didn't really think I could sell them. And I haven't really figured out what I'm going to do with them, because I don't necessarily want them anymore. And I don't know anyone I can give them to. It's kind of strange. Like, hey, want some adult comics? That would be kind of weird. But though some of them do have really beautiful art, so I'm probably going to keep some of them. Um, and I whittled it all down until I had one long box. That was it. I still got it. And that's a combination of both single issue comics and a number of graphic novels I kept. 'Cause I kept quite a few of the graphic novels that I had. Not all of them. I got rid of a lot of graphic novels. I had a magazine boxes. If you've seen them, they're shorter than a long box, cardboard long box, but they're still a big hefty box. And I got rid of an entire box of graphic novels like that once. I just gave them to somebody I knew. I'm like, here, he's a comic collector. Here, take these. And he was eternally grateful. He's actually become my special friend because of this, which is occasionally annoying, but at least they went to a new home. So I loved comics at one time. It was a really big part of me. I have Batman, and Superman, and I read Spider-Man, and I liked the Avengers, and Green Lantern, and the Hulk. I was a big Wolverine fan. I loved X-Men. I thought that X-Men were great. There were lots of independent things, like I Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I liked a lot of Anthro comic books, the black and white Anthro comic books that were big at in the 80s and 90s. I really enjoyed reading the comics. They were a wonderful escape. And my favorite comic was an issue of Star-Lord. It was Marvel Presents. I think it was Marvel Presents 11 or 14. I don't remember which one. But it was a comic book, and I believe I've spoken about it before, because it is the quintessential comic for me. It is the comic that hits every single comic book note perfectly. And I think it's also just a good general piece of science fiction. And I use it as pretty much a watermark where I compare every single piece of science fiction I've ever read or seen to this comic book. And I don't think I've ever seen anything that hit every note as well for me as this comic book did. So I did love comics at one time. I am no longer really into them. I have a friend that is a comic book artist. His name is Scott Wegener, Wegener. He does the Atomic Robo comic and a number of other comics. He's had a number of Marvel contracts over the years. And he lives in Staten Island now. He used to live in here in New Hampshire. And in fact, I just saw his wife and daughter last night. So I still have a tentative connection to the comic book world, and I still like to look at comic book blogs occasionally, just because I think they're interesting. I like the art, but comic books are essentially soap operas for nerds, and I got tired of soap operas. If I'm going to emotionally engage in something, I'm going to emotionally engage in you, real people who I interact with through YouTube or other social media or in real life. I don't need to be emotionally engaged to a comic book character. So I hope this answered your question. And if anyone else out there is a fan of comic books, I would love to hear what you read, what you love. Video responses or comments are always welcome.